Good afternoon, this is Chris Clark with Monday's Sports Page. Today devoted entirely to football and in particular Brian Clough in Abu Dhabi this week with his European champions Nottingham Forest.
Yeah, as a race we're a pretty thick lot, you know. But I don't think there's anybody that thick that I can't get through to.
I had a chat with Brian Clough at the Meridian Hotel a few hours before his team took to the field against Abu Dhabi's Emirates Sports Club. First of all, Brian, welcome to the UAE and congratulations on Forest's success in the European Cup semi-final first leg against Ajax Amsterdam on Wednesday in Nottingham.
Thank you, Chris. It was a good match.
2-0 seems to be a fair basis for success. How do you see it?
Well, we hope so, obviously. I think at that level of competition, I think 2 goals should be enough if you know what you're doing. And our experience in the European Cup obviously suggests that we know reasonably what we're doing. I was saying to the lads after the match, about 9:20 it was, and people were saying, well, do you think 2 is enough? And what I said to them was, I said, I wouldn't fancy going to Ajax 2-0 down. And I don't think they, fancy playing on their pitch 2-0 down either. Or I wouldn't fancy Ajax coming to the City Ground 2-0, us being 2-0 down. So I think 2 should be enough.
Did you have any special words for Forest before the game?
No, not really. There's no magic wands in football. We've been having a bad time away from home this season, and our form has been very much in and out. And on Saturday we were at Villa, previous to the Wednesday, and we thought we played quite well, but we lost 3-2. Conceded some very bad goals. But when you're dealing with high-class professionals, it's absolutely essential they get it right as soon as they can after a disastrous result. We'd played at Brighton the week previous to that, also away from home. Couldn't beat Brighton, we were beaten 1-0. So they all got themselves together, really, and they put the show on without too much interference from the management.
So you would agree with Bob Paisley that perhaps for that match the Forest players didn't need motivating?
They don't need motivating on most matches. Good pros never do.
Do you find that players either respond to you or don't respond to you, or do you have a knack for finding the right way to get through to almost any player?
Well, it's called management. That's the very essence of the word. To be a manager, you have to manage. And to manage in football clubs, you have to have the ability to probe and to get the best out of 15, 16, 17 players. And I would have thought if you don't get any response from a particular player over a period of time, then there's either something matter with you or certainly something matter with the player. Because it's a game where you do have to respond to each other.
But have you found that you've managed to get through to almost any player?
Yeah, as a race we're a pretty thick lot, you know. But I don't think there's anybody that thick that I can't get through to.
So you would have bought Georgie Best in his heyday?
I'd bought Georgie Best and attempted to handle him and been excited with the challenge of sharing his problems, because that's all he's got. He's got problems, right, and he needs more help than most people, that's all. It's not a case he's a worse lad than anybody else, because none of us are angels, but he just needs that little bit of extra help.
Knowing you as we do, I should think Ajax will be expecting Forest to play their normal game in Amsterdam, rather than defending doggedly as many teams do when they go away in Europe.
Well, I hope we do, Chris, because our normal away games in Europe have been exceptionally good, touch wood. I don't think we've been beaten in the European Cup away from home, and we do tend to like to go and score a goal.
You had great success away, but let's say Ajax are expecting you to play your normal game and do a fair bit of attacking and try and use the away goals rule. Do you think there's any chance, any small risk that you're perhaps becoming a little predictable?
There's always a possibility of that, but it's a thin dividing line. He'll be wondering what I'm going to do. I know what he's got to do. He's got to come and score 2 goals without conceding one. So I know exactly what he's got to do. He might be a bit wary of how I'm going to play it. And it's a terrible thing in the back of your mind where you say, well, 2 goals perhaps is not impossible, but by hell, you've got to be fully wary and over-concentrating for 90 minutes to stop the opposition scoring. And we have the ability up front in Francis and Bertels to get a goal against anybody in the world.
Real Madrid, I see, also won 2-0 on Wednesday against Kevin Keegan's SV Hamburg.
Bit of a surprise that was, Chris. It was a surprise to the footballing world.
In Madrid?
Yes, even in Madrid.
In front of 100,000 fanatical Spaniards?
Yes, 125 actually. And it was on telly live, that's how much they're fanatical. It was on television live and it still pulled 125,000 in. We got less than 32,000 at the City Ground in Nottingham. But despite the fact they were on home territory, it still was a surprise to the footballing world that Hamburg conceded 2 goals.
You really fancy Real Madrid at this stage?
Well, we don't mind, obviously. If we get through against Ajax, you don't mind who you play in finals, you know. Mm-hmm. That'll apply to Hamburg and Real.
I'd have thought the fact that in the final Real will be able to play again on their own ground
Yes.
would have been the biggest factor in your mind. It's not really fair, is it, that they should play in the final on their own ground?
I don't know who made the decision, and I don't know how it was arrived at, but whoever made it must have been balmy, because there's no sense at all in the possibility of Real getting to a final and being played on their own backyard. That is absolutely ridiculous.
Let's think about this Forest team then, and also the team that you built at Derby. How does this Forest team compare with that one?
I don't think it's as good. The team we built at Derby was a superb side. And the happiest part of our management, when you're first coming into management and you build something as good as Peter and I built at Derby, it was very, very special. You know, it's like your first car, your first bike, your first Christmas, your first of anything. No matter what you're going to achieve in life after that, it's never quite the same, and it's never quite as good. And with all due respect to the lads we have with us now, and they're smashing lads. There's no argy-bargy about them. They're very talented and they're very good, and a nice company to be with. But we formed a relationship with the Derby lot, which was superhuman, really. And it wasn't a natural relationship in many senses of the word, but.
Is it anything, do you think, to do with the fact that you were a very young man at the time, really, with young men?
Possibly.
Because there was talk, I know, that I heard of a special rapport between you and the players, almost like a family rather than a football club.
I used to play 5-a-side. Looking at me now, fat and 40-odd, you wouldn't think it possible, but I used to play 5-a-side with them 2 or 3 days a week, because when you play a lot of matches, you don't have to do a lot of training. And we curtailed our training to 5-a-side. And I tell the Forest lot now, there was on occasions on a Tuesday and Wednesday, it used to get frightening. It was that competitive. And people like McFarland, if he was on the opposition, used to get real nasty trying to play 5-a-side and try to win matches. And then we'd all get in the bath and it'd all be finished with, and it'd be a case of, well, who won and who didn't. And it possibly had a lot to do with age, you're right.
Why have you ever tried to bring McFarland to Forest?
Well, first of all, originally when we left, we couldn't get anybody, obviously, from Derby. Nobody. The clubs we went to, for example, weren't in the McFarland bracket. Yes. After that, I think he was too big to be bought. It was just a case of he was the one player where successive Derby managers said, well, there is always a possibility of you buying a player, but not him.
Because of loss of face, really?
Well, everything. He's the best player I've ever been associated with, for a start. At any position, at any level. Yes. He's an absolutely fantastic competitor, and he had so much ability. He had the ability to play centre forward, and he was a centre half.
Although quite short, really, for a central
player.
Yes,
and yet he headed it as good as though he was, 6'9", because his timing was brilliant, and his competitive spirit in the air had to be seen to be believed. He used to brush them aside, and he was only 11 stone wet through. Just over, and as you say, he wasn't very tall, but by hell, he used to wade through them. And when there was him there, obviously, and I bought Colin Todd from Sunderland, yes. Absolute perfect combination. They were like poetry. They were like a machine where the parts didn't have to be oiled. You just had to top them up occasionally throughout the season. And Roy was there in front, and Toddy was the exact opposite of McFarland. Very quiet, shy, off the field, wouldn't speak. McFarland was full of everything, and they were perfect partnership. I passed Colin Todd going to the ground on Wednesday night. He just lives around the corner from me in Bredsall, and he just had a house built, and I gave him away, and I thought, blow me, I wish you were playing tonight.
I feel compatibility is not something you can really say about Needham and Lloyd. But you seem to manage okay.
They're
Get
a
the
bit. They're a
results.
bit of the same type, Chris. We do get away with it because David Newden, once again, is an extremely honest young man, and they've both got vast experience. Vast experience. They're both in the 30s now, and they've had experience at top level as well. Larry Lloyd's played in a lot of competitions. He's won medals with us, obviously. He's won medals with Liverpool, and apart from the disastrous period he had at Coventry, he's had a very successful career. And their experience now is standing them in good stead, Chris. And whenever they get together, it gets them through. Plus the fact, of course, we're not idiots. We have the world's best goalkeeper behind us, and we have two very young full-backs. So the formula's right, the ingredients are there for a good, solid defensive display, despite the fact Needham and Lloyd are a little bit on the slow side.
Yes. Talking about experience, what is there in your experience that you think, which wasn't very great really when you entered management, that fitted you to become a good manager? Because you had immediate success even with Hartlepool.
Excuse me, the only thing I can think about was, I was intent on being manager when I was 21. I wanted to be a manager as soon as I became a player. So, I don't know whether I knew I was learning the business when I was 21, but I certainly took an active interest in...
You really had the conscious idea that you wanted to be a manager?
Yes. And I took the active interest. You see, football's like any other business. You've got to learn the game. And you'd be amazed how many footballers don't learn about football.
This great combination you seem to have now with Peter Taylor, how does it work exactly? Do you share responsibilities, or do you have lines of demarcation?
Yeah, we've shared more of the responsibilities lately, because Peter never used to attend the first team matches or anything like that. But we've gone through a phase now, and we've gone to the top, where to replace players in our team is extremely hard, because there's only a few who's good enough to get in. When you get to be league champions and European champions, you're at a level where it's extremely hard to replace somebody. So Peter spends more time with me now than he ever has.
I think there's a public image of Peter Taylor, the cool head, who holds in check the wilder vision and imagination of Brian Clough.
Chris,
Is that true?
that's balmy. He's worse than me. And I'm not kidding either. He loses his temper quicker, far more often. He's a grumpy old bugger, and he loses his temper far more often than I do.
Talking about Sunderland and Middlesbrough, I suppose every manager entering the game has one club in mind he'd dearly love to manage. Was Sunderland that club for you?
Well, it was a few years ago, Chris, because I spent the happiest time in my footballing life at Sunderland. Despite the fact I was only there 3 years and I only played for 18 months, I was far happier there than I had been at Middlesbrough, where I spent, what most people say, most of my career, although I never think I had a career really, I just had a half of one.
Yes.
But I was extremely happy at Sunderland, and of course George Hardwick, who was manager in those days for a short period of time, put me onto the coaching side. I was coaching the youth side, and it nigh on broke my heart when at the end of the season Ian McCall, who'd taken over as manager, do you remember the Scottish Ian McCall? He managed the Scotland side actually for a time as well. He said there wasn't a position for me at Sunderland, and as I say, it nigh on broke my heart.
How long ago was that?
Well, I was injured in 1962, so it was about 65, 66. I went into management before I was 30. So when the Sunderland job came vacant after that, I did apply a couple of times and was turned down a couple of times. So when eventually the full circle turned and they actually offered me the job, I was too entrenched in the Midlands. I was having too good a time with both Nottingham Forest and Derby, which I was there both times when they offered me a job, that I declined the invitation to go. Frank Clark's there, of course, at Sunderland, assistant manager, first year. We had the happiest of 4 years together, Frank and I, when he was at Nottingham. And he did one of the best jobs, because I got him a free transfer from Newcastle. He did one of the best jobs ever done in modern day football, Frank Clark did. He'd been at Newcastle 12, 13 years, and I think he'd won one thing in his career, and of course in 4 years he won every single honour the game had to offer practically with Nottingham. League Cups, Championship, Second Division, European Cups, everything, and he finished at 36.
You yourself have won just about every honour in the game now as a manager for Derby County and Nottingham Forest, except the FA Cup.
Yes, that seems to have eluded us over the years. We're staggered, actually. We've won so many cups over the last few years because we build our sides to win leagues, not to win cups. Any bad manager and bad side can flukily win a cup, you know. It's a case of 3 or 4, 5 lucky draws and you bingo, you've cracked it.
Is that how you account for your success in the League Cup?
This time the League Cup was the hardest we've been involved in. We were drawn away from home every single time. We were drawn away at Blackburn, Bristol, City we had to knock out, Middlesbrough we had to knock out. We survived a very, very dodgy 90 minutes at West Ham. Then, of course, we drew Liverpool in the semis, and everybody thought we'd be knocked out there. So, having got to Wembley, people thought we'd done the hard stuff, and of course we got the shock of our lives when Bulls beat us. But we pride ourselves, as I said, on building championship sides, and we like qualifying for Europe, for example, through our league position.
Having won so many things now, is there any ambition left in football for you, really?
Well, there are stacks of ambitions. What it is, Chris, is that once you've tasted success in any particular aspect of life or your job or whatever it is, if you've got anything about you, you don't really want an ambition after that because success is enough to guarantee you want it again. I want success again because I liked it when I got it.
The same success or a different kind of success?
Well, it's always different. It's always different. When we won, see, I wasn't excited when we won the European Cup. I wasn't as excited as people thought I should have been. But I was more excited winning the League Cup the second time than I was the first time. So, as I've said, once you've tasted a success and you like the taste and you want it back, and that's an ambition in itself.
Well, thank you very much, Brian, for all the time you spent with us.
Chris, I've enjoyed it. It's the longest 2 minutes I've ever talked in my life. Come again. And when you've got your own show in about 5 years' time, just remember who got you the start. No, I'm only kidding. Thanks very much.
And when you've won the European Cup, congratulations anyway in advance.
Well, we'll try very much. Don't count your chickens before the hatch, but we'll try very, very hard.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Chris.
Nottingham Forest's ebullient manager Brian Clough. Incidentally, Forest scored 4 goals in that match against Emirates Sports Club, won by Gary Birtles and a hat-trick from Trevor Francis. Many thanks go to 35 State Express, and in particular their publicity man Barry Boardman, for making the match possible. Well, Sports Page next week will be back to its usual formula, but for now, from me, Chris Clark, goodbye.